One of the central features of the conventional image that we have about scientific knowledge and the scientific process is that it is somehow universal, that science in the United States is inherently the same as science in France, in China, in South Africa, in Brazil. That science is, at the end of the day, a form of universal knowledge that is privileged because it finds facts that are not dependent on culture and that are not dependent on individual contexts. This clashes with the discussions that we've had over the last couple of weeks, where we've looked at how science is socially patterned through a variety of institutions, how expertise themselves are the product of complex networks that bring into being facts, bring into being outcomes by linking different types of devices, individuals, knowledges across a multiplicity of scales from the very local to the very global in order to produce the effects that we see as science. Indeed, from physics to ecology, from economics to anthropology, the pretense of universal knowledge is ultimately built on the local. The local, be it a small lab bench or a field site, is always the source of knowledge. It is this local which allows us to produce this object, this institution, science, which seems to be universal. Now, how the local and the global relate, how scales are presented within scientific discourse matters profoundly because it reveals some of the connections between science and different forms of politics. When thinking about scale in science, about how the discourse of dimensions, of location, of place exists within science, what we are really thinking about is the way scientific knowledge is ultimately connected to forms of politics. In how they sought to classify and categorize the world, for example, natural history and the early biological sciences of the late 18th and early 19th century were massive investments in extending commerce and industry to the emerging colonial networks controlled by the West. They were part and parcel, indeed, of empire and colonization. It's impossible to extract the forms of knowledge that were produced by natural historians, by naturalists of the 19th century, from the political project to build empire. These were part of this project of transforming the local across the orb, into quantifiable forms of property that could be consumed and traded by the metropole. Similarly, in how it has conceptualized the behavioral universe of individuals in the economy as information processors, disciplines such as modern neoclassical economics are tied to the politics of command and control and communications that were part of the efforts of the 1940s to win the war by transforming the political economies within the United States and across the world. Indeed, in how location comes to matter in science, in how place, how size, how dimensions are considered part of the discourse of scientific practice, how we think of local sciences versus universal sciences, of sciences that invite collaboration versus sciences that are built on ideas of identifiable national traditions, what happens is we are talking about the politics that belies the scientific enterprise. During this week, I want us to consider how this politics becomes visible, how this politics transpires in the way science pursues novel projects, invests in specific developments, and pursues paradigms that are ultimately about very local concerns that matter for very local political reasons.